Welcome to the Depth Dive. We make space here for the uncomfortable questions.
The ones that maybe simmer under the surface.
Exactly. So consider this, and it's a tough one. What if the cure is actually part of the disease?
What if our efforts are very real, well-intentioned efforts to help trans kids?
Are somehow inadvertently causing harm, or maybe leading them down a path that isn't quite right for them?
It's a deeply provocative thought. And that's what we're exploring today, the sheer complexity around childhood gender identity.
We're asking that unspoken question. Are good intentions enough? Or could they be fueling distress?
Think about parents right now. It's an incredibly difficult position.
Yeah, your child expresses this deep discomfort, maybe distress, with their assigned sex at birth.
And the culture, often the immediate message is affirm,
Yeah.
affirm right away.
Oh, there's that nagging feeling for some, isn't there? That little voice asking, wait, is this the only way?
Are we maybe closing doors too soon? Are there other things to explore?
It's like walking a tightrope. You want to show empathy, be supportive now.
But you're also thinking about the future, about decisions that might be, well, irreversible.
I saw this video recently, a very young child just confidently listing their pronouns.
Okay.
And my reaction, it surprised me. It wasn't like instant warmth. It was something closer to frustration, annoyance maybe?
Wow, that's honest.
And then boom, immediate guilt. Like, how could I feel that? It made me think, are we so locked into one script?
So locked in that just questioning it feels like you've done something wrong, a moral failing.
Yeah. Is that where we are?
Well, we live in this time that really pushes authenticity, right? Be yourself.
It's everywhere. Be true to yourself.
But what does yourself mean when you're, say, 13, 14?
When your identity is still very much under construction.
Exactly. And you're swimming in social media, you have this deep need to belong, to find your tribe.
So when does that push for liberation, for self-expression?
When does it actually become a different kind of box? Maybe one that adults have built thinking they're helping.
Look at the conversations happening, or maybe the arguments.
Oh, yeah. School board meetings.
Total shouting matches. Online forums are just battle zones.
And you have to ask, are we really truly focusing on the kids, on their well-being?
Or have they become symbols? Pawns in a bigger culture war fought by adults.
Their actual needs getting lost in the noise.
Parents face this almost impossible choice, it feels like.
The nightmare choice, yeah. On one side, you've got the possibility of medical interventions, blockers, hormones, maybe surgery down the line.
With long-term effects that are,
Yeah.
well, let's be honest, still not fully understood. And the risk of regret, that's real.
Absolutely. But then on the other side,
The fear that if you don't affirm, if you hesitate, if you suggest exploring other things.
that your child could spiral into despair.
No.
Real mental health crisis territory right now.
High stakes doesn't even begin to cover it. How do you make that call?
And the certainty you sometimes hear, it can be jarring.
A friend told me about their pediatrician, young child, expressing some cross-gender feelings. And the doctor almost instantly declares, yes, this is who your child is. Just like that. Absolute certainty.
Wow. Is that genuine insight? Or is it maybe dogma?
Is it reflecting the child's truth, or is it reflecting the prevailing ideology? Is it simplifying something incredibly complex?
We need to ask ourselves, maybe challenge our own motivations here.
If you feel strongly conviction about supporting trans kids, where does that come from?
Have you really grappled with all the viewpoints? The uncomfortable ones? The ones that raise flags?
Or, and this is tough to ask, is some of that certainty driven by a fear of social consequences?
Fear of being called names, of being ostracized? Is it, as maybe Nietzsche would point out, a kind of social cowardice dressed up as virtue?
Or deep conviction? It's hard to tell sometimes, even ourselves.
And the science. Everyone says follow the science.
But which science?
Yeah.
Because there seem to be different strands emerging.
Right. There's research supporting affirmation, immediate support. Okay.
But then there's also newer stuff coming out about, like, social contagion.
Desistance kids who feel this way for a while and then don't.
And detransition, people who went down the medical path and now regret it. Are we looking at all of that science?
Or are we just cherry-picking the bits that fit the narrative we prefer?
The road to hell paved with selective science, perhaps?
History gives us some pretty sobering examples, doesn't it? Times when society was absolutely convinced of something.
Like the recovered memory craze in the 80s and 90s.
Exactly. Or how homosexuality was medicalized, treated as an illness.
Things that seem unbelievable now, we look back and think, how could they have gotten it so wrong?
So the uncomfortable question is, are we potentially in one of those moments right now, a kind of collective blindness.
Especially when children are involved. The stakes are just so incredibly high.
And what about the detransitioners? Their stories are often quiet, marginalized.
You hear a lot about the positive transition stories, the triumphs, and those are important, of course.
But are we making enough space for the people who say, actually, this was a mistake for me?
Does hearing that challenge the main story too much? Does it make us too uncomfortable?
Online, you see a lot of performative allyship, maybe.
Pronouns in the bio, the right hashtags.
All the signals of being supportive, being an ally, which can be good, but
But privately, when the screen is off, do those doubts creep in for people?
do you ever think, is this really the best way for every kid? Or is it more complicated?
Let's paint a really dark picture for a second. Imagine a child transitions.
Okay.
And outwardly,
Yeah.
celebrated, supported, validated by everyone, looks like a success story.
Right.
But inwardly, that child is miserable, full of regret, maybe feeling lost.
A hidden reality behind the public face.
Would we, as a society, choose the celebration, prioritize that outward image of success?
Over the child's actual, internal, maybe unspoken suffering.
What happens when our ego, our need to be seen as progressive, conflicts with the child's potential future pain?
That's a deeply unsettling thought.
Schools, you mentioned, are ground zero. Big fights over curriculum, over policies.
Yeah, and parents who raise concerns, even careful ones, can get shouted down, labeled.
But what about the parents who don't speak up, who sit there silently during those meetings?
Are they quiet because they genuinely think silence protects their kid?
Or are they quiet because they're afraid? Afraid of the social cost in their town, their community, protecting their own standing?
It's hard to know. Let's just rapid fire some possibilities for why a child might express gender dysphoria.
Okay. Social media trends, peer influence,
Yep. Underlying autism, neurodiversity is sometimes playing a role.
trauma, past experiences shaping current feelings.
A genuine search for belonging, for an identity that feels right in a confusing world.
Or, an innate core sense of identity that doesn't match their birth sex.
Or maybe it's a complex mix of several of those things.
Exactly. How can anyone look at that mix and declare with absolute certainty, I know exactly what this is and what needs to happen?
It seems almost impossible, doesn't it? The certainty itself feels suspect.
Personally, I deeply believe in individual freedom, the right to define yourself. But then I see what feels like this ideological steamroller sometimes.
Yeah, a kind of momentum that maybe pushes nuance aside.
Pushes aside dissenting voices, alternative explanations, all in the name of progress. It makes me ask, when does a good cause become rigid?
Does questioning that make you a monster? Or just human? And maybe a little scared.
I know a therapist who shared something confidentially.
Okay.
They see a lot of kids presenting as trans, but also with significant anxiety, maybe OCD, maybe on the spectrum.
Right, co-occurring conditions.
And this therapist worries that the rush to affirm, to maybe start medical steps.
Might be overshadowing the need to address those other issues first or alongside.
Exactly, but they felt they couldn't really voice that concern openly. Professionally risky.
The silence from professionals.
Yeah.
That's telling, isn't it? What does it hide?
Here's an unpopular truth, perhaps.
Go on.
Gender transition absolutely brings peace and authenticity for some people. Life-saving, even.
No question. We have to hold that.
For others, it could be a profound, irreversible tragedy.
A decision made young with lifelong consequences that turns out to be wrong for them.
And no amount of societal acceptance or validation after the fact can fully undo that kind of regret.
It's a heavy thought. Think about gender reveal parties for babies. Pink or blue smoke, all this excitement.
Huge industry now.
And then compare that to gender affirmation clinics opening up for younger and younger children.
Is there a connection? Does it say something about our culture's intense focus, maybe obsession with gender?
Is it progress? Or is it maybe a kind of cultural narcissism playing out?
Let yourself feel this for a moment. When you hear about puberty blockers for, say, a 10-year-old,
Okay.
does any part of you feel a little uneasy? A flicker of, whoa, that's young.
Be honest with yourself.
And if you feel that flicker, do you immediately shut it down? Label it internalized transphobia.
Or could that unease be something else? Maybe a deeper wisdom. an intuition about childhood development needing time.
Think about liberation movements. They aim to free people, right?
That's the goal.
But sometimes the very structures built to liberate can end up creating new kinds of pressure, new boxes.
Like Jung talked about the shadow. Even the best intentions can have an unseen, potentially harmful side.
Could that be happening here?
Let's flip the script. Could our intense desire to affirm, to be supportive, to not cause pain,
Could that actually get in the way of a child truly exploring all possibilities for themselves?
could our certainty become a barrier, preventing them from finding a path that doesn't involve medical transition, but still resolves their distress?
We talk about unconditional support. It sounds so good.
Absolutely. Who wouldn't want that?
But what if sometimes that unconditional support comes with like a pre-approved script
The script that says affirmation is the only loving response.
and questioning, exploring alternatives that gets framed as unsupportive or harmful?
Are we maybe more afraid of our own discomfort or of social disapproval than we are committed to a child's long-term complex future?
History again. Think about eugenics, lobotomies.
Widely accepted medical and societal practices at the time, seen as progress by many.
Now we look back in horror. What makes us so sure we have it all figured out now?
What guarantees that future generations won't look back at our approach to childhood gender distress with similar dismay? That certainty is dangerous.
Here's a twist point to consider. How much of this intense focus on trans kids is really about the kids themselves
Versus what?
versus adult anxieties, adult needs for virtue signaling, adult political identities being played out?
Are the children sometimes serving as a canvas onto which adults project their own issues, their own battles?
What if the unconditional love we offer is actually conditional?
Conditional on the child confirming our worldview, making us feel enlightened or progressive.
That's a harsh question, but maybe necessary.
How will history judge us? Our time, our handling of this?
Will they see compassion and liberation, or a generation of adults who rushed in, driven by certainty, potentially overlooking complexity?
So much emphasis is put on immediate affirmation. That's the urgent call.
But maybe true liberation for a child lies in the freedom to be uncertain.
The freedom to explore without feeling pressured to land on a label, especially a medical one, too soon.
Maybe the real support is allowing space for that messy, confusing, unfolding process of self-discovery.
Let's go back to that parent facing the dilemma. Affirm or question? Immediate relief versus long-term questions.
After considering all this, these uncomfortable angles, has anything shifted for you listening?
Even a little. Has the certainty maybe cracked just a bit?
Look, this is tough stuff. If this deep dive is making you feel uncomfortable, angry, confused, that's okay.
It means you're engaging, thinking critically.
Share this conversation, maybe especially with people who seem absolutely certain one way or the other.
Not to win an argument, but just to open up the space for more questions. To challenge the idea that questioning itself is harmful.
Is that unwavering support we're told to offer always pure compassion?
Or is it sometimes?
Yeah.
Just sometimes. A way to protect ourselves from discomfort, from criticism, from being wrong.
Which risk is greater? The risk of temporary confusion or invalidation if we explore cautiously?
Versus the risk of permanent regret from irreversible medical steps taken too soon. Which betrayal cuts deeper?
We slap these diagnostic labels on kids' gender dysphoria like it neatly explains everything.
But a child's sense of self is. It's a developing story, isn't it? Not a static diagnosis. It's fluid, complex, unfolding.
Imagine that young adult, years later, regretting their transition, sitting with the physical changes.
What do you say to them? What can the adults who cheered them on affirm them without question? What words are there?
Think about your own private doubts. We all have them sometimes. What are they related to this?
And then ask, who am I really protecting by keeping quiet about those doubts?
The kids.
Or myself.
Relentless affirmation, even with the best heart, if it doesn't make room for exploring other possibilities.
It can become an echo chamber, right? A closed loop.
It might inadvertently trap a child in one narrative, preventing them from finding another path that might fit them better.
There's this quote from a detransitioner. It was haunting.
What was it?
Something like, they didn't force me. They just loved me into it. And in that love, I lost myself.
Wow, loved me into it. That captures the terrible potential paradox here.
What's the long-term cost? Of politeness, of avoiding hard conversations, of fearing being labeled.
Could our collective silence, our fear of speaking out, actually harm a generation?
When you see something that makes you uneasy in this area, maybe a story, a policy, an interaction.
Do you speak up? Do you ask the awkward question, even if your voice shakes?
Or do you swallow it? Find a reason why it's probably fine, why it's not your place.
Causing harm here doesn't require bad intentions. Not at all.
Just passivity. Just accepting the dominant story without real critical thought. That can be enough.
Who actually gets to define a child as trans in this storm of influences, peers, internet, parents, doctors, the child's own feelings?
Who holds that authority? It's a profound question with no simple answer.
I have to admit, my own thinking on this has shifted. I started from a place of pretty unquestioning acceptance.
Believing that was the enlightened, compassionate stance.
Yeah, but then listening more widely, especially to people who've detransitioned, people raising flags.
It made me realize my enlightenment might have been, well, a form of ignorance, missing huge parts of the picture.
There's a developmental psychologist I read
Hmm.
who talked about the danger not just being the feelings a child has, but the way society and medicine might rush to fix that identity.
Solidified prematurely.
Exactly, foreclosing other developmental paths. And they connected it to this idea that sin isn't just doing bad things, but aggressively justifying those things.
The relentless justification, even of potentially harmful paths.
Wow. So what's the unsettling question you've maybe buried about what's happening?
The one you try not to think about too much. Let it surface.
Think about times you've agreed with something, maybe publicly.
But privately, you weren't so sure. You did it to keep the peace or gain approval.
Does any of that dynamic feel familiar in conversations about gender identity? In your family? Friends? Online?
Maybe. Maybe there's no clear moral high ground here.
Maybe all paths hold potential harms, and we're all just adults stumbling around with varying degrees of blindness.
Could your self-image as the enlightened helper actually be part of the problem? Adding pressure, adding confusion.
Here's a direct challenge. If you privately doubted a child's declared gender path, seriously doubted it,
Would you risk the social fallout? Risk being called transphobic? Risk losing friends or status?
or would your need to be seen as good lead you to stay silent, to be complicit in something you weren't sure about?
Truly putting kids first means facing that maybe, just maybe, a lot of this noise is about adult needs, adult power struggles.
If things shift in the future, if the consensus changes, if harms become more widely acknowledged.
How will you account for your position now, your actions or your inaction?
Silence when you see potential harm, especially medical harm to children. It isn't neutrality.
It's taking a side. It could be seen as cowardice.
What will you tell your kids or grandkids about this time? What did you do? What questions did you dare to ask?
Real support might mean giving up the comfort of easy answers, questioning all the scripts.
It means embracing the deep discomfort of not knowing, of uncertainty.
I'll admit, I've swallowed doubts, felt that fear of speaking against the grain. It's painful, that self-censorship.
We're all in this confusing, often scary territory together. Let's at least acknowledge the fear, the uncertainty, right? Without rushing to judgment.
So that original question, is the trans movement in some ways creating or exacerbating mental illness for some kids?
The terrifying answer is maybe. For some, maybe yes. While for others, it's absolutely life-saving.
And the tragedy is the impossibility of knowing for sure which path is right for that specific child right now.
A child's identity isn't a destination you arrive at and plant a flag. It's a journey. It unfolds.
And maybe our role as adults is just to walk alongside them. With courage, yes, but also with profound humility, especially into the unknown.
Not to force a map on them, but to help them navigate their own path.
If this deep dive brought up strong feelings, good, sit with that. Reflect on these uncomfortable truths.
And if you found yourself nodding along with some of the questions raised here, share this. Challenge the certainties out there.
This was the deep dive. We don't promise answers. We promise to keep asking. Are you brave enough to question your own beliefs, especially when a child's future is on the line?